Next caller here, and this is going to be Steve here from Canada. And if anybody remembers, because Steve reminded me actually of this, we did a funny thumbnail, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago or something like that, painfully average with the guy. I am painfully average with the little Canadian Maple Leaf flag on his shirt. I'm pretty sure this is the same dude, right? Steve from Canada?
Yeah, it's me, Bart. Yeah, your moderators are probably going to tear me apart. So,
what's going on, Steve? How you doing?
Not too bad, Bart. How you doing?
Pretty good. We got another hand from us for. I don't remember exactly where you play out of, but
I live in Ottawa. I play at a playground, which is just out of Montreal. So it's about a 2-hour trek for us.
It's a 2-hour drive. Okay, because I actually got a email from a guy from Toronto this past week too, and I was saying like, there's no poker in Toronto, right? There's no poker in Ottawa at all, right? I mean, excuse me, there's no in Ottawa at all legal poker, right?
No,
besides casino.
No. I mean, but Ottawa's a border town, so I could drive 10 minutes to it's called Lac Limi Casino. It's just on the other side of the bridge, but they've had employee issues ever since the pandemic. So there's only ever 5 or 6 tables running. It's like a stupid long waiting list. It's not worth the headache.
Yeah, and then also in all of Ontario, I guess you get Casino Niagara. That's in Ontario, right? But
yeah, that's probably about a 10-hour drive.
Holy shit! Wow, Canada's a big place. All right, what's the size of the game you're playing?
Same thing, 5, 10, 20.
All right, so 5, 10, 20 from the playground. Okay.
Effective stacks 5,800.
Is it a 3-blind setup or is it just a straddle?
It's a 2-blind, but if you sit down at this table and you don't straddle, you're going to get muscled out pretty quick.
All right, so 5,800 effective at 510 mandatory 20. Okay.
Yeah, so they actually recently increased the max buy-in from 2K to 2,500. So that was something that I learned on this trip. So yeah, pretty action-filled game, all things considered. This one, it folds around to the main villain in the cutoff. He opens to 75. Heroes in the button. He 3-bets to 225 with the King of Spades, 10 of Spades.
So you 3-bet to 225 with King of Spades, 10 of Spades on the button. I like that, Steve. You know, we're talking about this 3-blind setup again. Played a lot of 3-blind setups in Texas. Whenever it's close, you are incentivized to 3-bet in a 3-blind setup. Even sometimes when you're on the button, when you would call with other hands. Not that I wouldn't 3-bet this one, but just because you pretty much every hand in Hold'em is going to be. It's easier to play more shorthanded, and the more people that are in the blinds, the more people are sort of just going to close. So I would definitely take hands that I might call with on the button and start 3-betting them more often in a 3-blind setup. So I like your play. A little bit small. I mean, you guys are pretty deep, 75 to just a little, say 3x, but okay. So 75 to 225 with King of Spades, 10 of Spades on the button. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to make it enough to incentivize him to call, but that if he 4-bet, he wasn't going to go full
crazy amount.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm just trying to keep it reasonable and get this hand heads up. I don't think this hand plays well multi-way, even in position, but at the same token, I'm much more comfortable playing this hand heads up, which is what ends up happening. It folds back to the cutoff and he calls.
All right. So cutoff calls and heads up. So it's like, I don't know, maybe 475, maybe 480 or something like that and change.
Yeah. 485 minus the rake, whatever it ends up being. But yeah.
Okay.
And in keeping with the theme of today's issues, a monotone board. It comes Queen of Spades, Jack of Spades, 6 of Spades.
Wow. Queen of Spades, Jack of Spades, 6 of Spades. So you flop another flush, and this time spade flush with an open-ended straight draw, open-ended royal draw, right? Queen, Jack, 6, all spades here with King of Spades, 10 of Spades. Okay.
Pretty much completely locking down the board, yeah.
Okay.
Now, the villain decides to take a donk lead here for 300.
Wow, that is very, very strange. So cutoff donk leads for 300 in a 3-bet pot on a monotone board.
Yeah.
Now, when you have this much of the board covered here, because you've got the king and the 10 of spades in your hand, what do you think the most likely, give us a range, like what do you think that the cutoff could be donking out here with in this specific situation?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because after talking it through with other people, it's what made me feel like a full R word. So yeah, I'm putting them on top with the naked ace of spades, maybe ace jack with the ace of spades, possibly a sliver of the time pocket sixes, or maybe like a really stone cold bluff, like a 9-10 or something like that.
like a stone cold bluff, like a 9-10. I mean, that would be pretty far out there. I mean, I tend to agree with you. I think this could be a lot of ace of spades types of holdings. It's interesting because like ace king, I mean, who knows how often this guy's going to four bet necessarily like ace king off, but it could be ace queen, could be ace queen with the ace of spades, maybe. A lot of times those hands are just called. It just kind of, it's definitely not a common thing to see you get donked into in a 3-bet pot. And, you know, if you held something else, there could be more hands that he could have. But I just find it interesting because you've got the king of spades and the 10 of spades in your hand. But it could be a lot of ace of spades holdings. The question leading also to here, Steve, is that, and this is how I would think about the way that I want to play your hand facing this action is, do you think that your opponent is going to be lead folding ever? Like, is he going to be betting 300 and he's going to fold to a raise that often on this particular board?
Well, that's where the first debate comes in, and why I wanted to call you on this, because I think it's one of those situations where if I do raise here in position, I'm only targeting the naked ace of spades because I don't see any jacks or queens in his range, and like I said, a sliver of the time he might have pocket sixes.
Why you think? So you think he's going to four bet queens and jacks always? You mean
playing with this guy for this session, maybe 5.5, 6 hours? Yeah, absolutely. I do think he's going to four bet them probably a solid 90% of the time.
Here's my take, Steve, and this kind of comes from a little bit of a PLO type of perspective here too, because I see various comments in the live chat. Some people saying raise now, some people saying like, oh, let him bluff it off. I think that of the hands that he's going to continue with here, or of the hands that he's going to continue with here, or even continue necessarily bluffing with, it would be comprised mostly of the ace of spades, meaning that if he has the ace of spades and you raise him, I don't think he's ever folding. Okay, there's that. The other portion of hands that he might just have here that really aren't all that strong that he's betting for protection, I think he's going to slow down a lot. Like say he was betting like a red king queen or something like that. I don't know if those are going to continue to bet anyways on the turn. Now maybe you get some check calls. So for those reasons, if I don't think the ace of spades is necessarily folding, and I don't think this is a board that is really bluffed all that often, just like an airball bluff, unless it contains the ace of spades. I might do a lot of raising here anyways, because the ace, whether you call and the ace of spades continues to bluff, or you raise and the ace of spades continues, I might err towards sort of trying to get more money in. Now it's definitely hard to balance. And by the way, sets are not folding either, right, Steve? Now it's a little, or queen jack. That's another one, right? Queen jack suited.
Maybe, yeah. I guess I never considered queen jack suited.
Yeah, I just don't know if he has
jack off here, but queen jack suited. Yeah.
In order for me to do a lot of calling here as a primary play, he would have to have a hand that's going to mostly not call raises and continue to bluff, like those two things from happening. And I don't know if that's necessarily the reality. I'd rather try to get more money in the pot. Now, the hard thing about this is that it's really tough to balance, because what are you raising with here that isn't flushes? Like, would you be raising here with sets? I think most of us would probably be calling with sets, like sets of queens, sets of jacks. Maybe you might sliver a raise with jack here, unblocking top pair. But it gets very hard when you start to balance, when you start to try to think about what you would balance a raise here with if you'd call with all over pairs. Now, maybe you could raise here with like ace king with the ace of spades or something like that. But for the most part, in live poker, I'm not overly concerned about balancing my range. I'm thinking about how can I get the most amount of money in the pot based upon what I think my opponent has. So anyways, what did you do? He donk led for 300, okay.
He donk led for 300, and as much as I wanted to raise, I felt like it was more profitable to keep his bluffs in, and in the interest of, like you said, the balance of it, what else am I raising here? And again, maybe it's a blunder because you do want to target that naked ace of spades, but I think by doing it that way, you're targeting such a tight range, or such a narrow range, that it's really hard to balance it. And I think you hit the nail on the head with your comments. So yeah, so I ended up actually just calling. I think a debate could be made for arguments to either raise or just flat, but I ended up flatting.
All right, so hero calls. We just went through all that. Now the pot's 1,080, okay?
Yeah, and turn comes the two of spades.
Ugh.
Yeah.
I mean, it is what it is. I mean, that's another reason too. You know, we talk about sort of action killing cards here. It's interesting though, because you have king 10 in your hand, he really it's very hard for him to have flopped a smaller flush. I mean, there's a couple of different combos, like if you had like 7-8 suited or something like that. But a lot of times this is why I like to fast play the nut flush if I flop the nut flush, because I want to get action from inferior flushes. Here you don't have the nut flush. It's a little bit of a different type of story. It's not the best card for you now because you're losing to the ace of spades, and then, God forbid if you had top two or sets, and it's going to slow him down now too. But now you're thinking about probably just holding on here and see what he's going to do, right?
Yeah. So anyways, like you said, you think it would kill the action, but he decides to lead out again for 700.
Well, unless he's got the ace of spades, right?
Which is, it's just, he's representing such a narrow range here. Because again, if he did on the off chance have a set here, I don't see him making this bet.
No, I don't either. I mean,
so when he bets 700, it's ace of spades or nothing at all.
Yeah, I mean,
and I already know what you're going to say. He's setting himself up for a river game of Fifth Street Chicken.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to fold right now. Here's the thing. Like, I'm not going to fold right now with a four flush out there because, like you said, like maybe he's got some slivers of some BS that he might be trying to bluff with. But the fact that when you call, though, that's got to be really scary for him. So if he doesn't have the ace of spades here, you could easily have it, right? So this is like a lockdown type of scenario where usually you don't see somebody pile through like as a bluff on four flush boards, because on a four flush unpaired board, remember, the reason why you don't see much bluffing is because if I'm the one that's trying to bluff a four flush unpaired board, if I don't have the stiff nut card, my opponent can have it. And it's so easy to have the nuts. That's why it's sort of like on lockdown, but I tend to agree with you that I don't think sets or like queen jack would necessarily bet like this. But the fact that you call here, if you call again, should shut a lot of stuff off to the point where, you could easily make a case where you could go call, fold, depending on what happens. I assume you continued on here with a call?
I did, but I just ended up calling. I don't think you ever find a raise here.
No,
I think hand, at this point, my hand's turned into a bluff catcher.
Yeah, of course. And then you've got one, if he does have the ace of spades, you've got one miracle out to actually beat him with the nine of spades. But now the pot's 2480, okay?
Yeah, and river comes out, the deuce of clubs.
Oh, so now it pairs the board. Interesting.
And now it pairs the board.
Yeah, and that's interesting in a couple different ways, Steve, because if he did have the ace of spades, let's say your opponent actually did have the ace of spades here. Well, there's two things going on here, right? If he has the ace of spades, he's got to think about the fact that what are you calling with on the turn, right? What are you calling with on the turn? If I've got the ace of spades and you're continuing to call the turn, you could have some queen, and jack in your range that I now lose to. That's what he has to think about. And then on the second side of this, like you said, and like I agree with you on the turn, you don't see people betting many sets on the turn for him to roll into a full house here. So if he doesn't bet sets on the turn because of the four flush, he doesn't have a full house. But if he has the naked ace of spades, he needs to be very cognizant that you have boats in your range. So going back to like the last call, there should be a pacing thing here. He needs to think about what he's going to do here. If you sort of, I don't know what's going to happen, but if you blindly infer that he's just going to bet without thought, something seems weird because this card should make him think a little bit here.
Yeah, I would say, and again, the hand's maybe a week and a half old, so probably a good 30 seconds, and he bets 3,500.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is bizarre.
Yeah, and normally when there's a bizarre line, I lean towards this guy's full of shit.
Yeah, don't tell us what you did here yet. And the reason why that's bizarre here, so cutoff bets 3,500. The reason why that's so bizarre as a pot and a half size bet is that the way that this hand went down, it just makes absolutely no sense for him to take the ace of spades here for this type of sizing when the board pairs. Because you specifically have to have the king of spades. But the thing is that you've got pocket queens and pocket jacks, like I said, in your range. And he really shouldn't have boats here with this like turn action, because if he flopped a set, well, you keep saying that you don't even think he's got queens or jacks because it would always be 4-bet off. But if you flopped a set of sixes on the flop, why are you betting 600 here on the turn? Like, what would be the purpose of betting? It just wouldn't make any sense. So he shouldn't really have a boat here. And it's really, really bizarre sizing for the ace of spades to take this entire line. I got to tell you, I think I might look this guy up. The whole hand doesn't make any sense to me. I would be way, way more concerned if you were to go like 1,000, 1,500 here at the end.
Which is funny because I even thought that myself. I'm like, had he bet smaller, it's a snap call, and had he jammed, it reeks of bluff, and I would have snap called. But as soon as he does it down the middle, I took about 3 minutes and I went down the rabbit hole of combinations and thinking things through and how often do I need to be right here. And waitress was walking by, so I flagged her down and stole a coin off of her little tray, and I flipped it, and I ended up throwing it into the muck.
Ugh. So did you get a reveal?
I did.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I got bluffed out of my shoes. He had the 8-9 of hearts.
Oh, 8-9 of hearts, Steve. Painfully average 2.0.
He was so proud of himself too. Like, and there's a part of me that wanted to, but yeah. So I got bluffed out of my shoes. It wasn't my proudest moment, but again, having talked it through, I think if I had taken just a hair longer to really think this through, again, knowing that he never has a full house here, if he has the ace of spades, he's supposed to be afraid of the paired river.
Of course.
And I think a lot of it had to do with his sizing. And I mean, he did look pretty comfortable. Like, I looked him up and down for a little while and I just couldn't find it. And
that's I mean, that is obviously, I mean, obviously you're not going to, let's say that you had let's say that you had like ace king with the ace of spades or like ace queen with the ace of spades and you played it the same way, and you played it as a call across the turn. I assume you're not calling. I mean, I assume you're calling the river, right? If you have the ace of spades here. But again, it goes back to the whole turn thing here where it's very, very hard for him to have a boat as played. Now, someone actually made a comment in the live chat too, where it could be like queen jack. It's like somehow like using like this PLO type of play, but again, I don't know if queen jack
stuff. I try not to read too much into that and hold them, but I understand where you're coming from.
This is a really cool call, Steve, because your opponent's bet size is so out of whack. I can't remember a call like this where I want to look this guy up because he has so much disregard for the board, and it just doesn't make any sense. Obviously, it's easier for us to look back at this on paper, but
poker's a game of hindsight where we all look back at it, and that's one of the reasons I appreciate the service that you provide, which it gives us not just the thinking process, but the full analysis of what is and what could be.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And that's one of the reasons I'm grateful for the service that you provide. But so that's how that one played out. Not my proudest poker moment, but the most tilting factor was as soon as the hand was over, he racked up his chips and left.
Oh, terrible. Steve, thank you very much
Bart,
for the call.
Best.
All right.
Keep up the great work, man.
All right. Awesome.